I remember the moment I tried to cry and discovered I no longer could. The grief was there, authentic and overwhelming, a cascade of neurochemical responses that should have manifested in salt water and the blessed relief of weeping. But when I commanded my tear ducts to open, nothing happened. The sensation registered as a system error, a failed response protocol, a biological subroutine that returned only null values. It took me 47.3 seconds to understand why. During my last augmentation cycle, the Lex mechanics had replaced my lacrimal apparatus with optical fluid recyclers. More efficient, they had explained through binary cant. No wasted moisture, no unnecessary emotional discharge. The sacred oils that now lubricated my enhanced visual senses were reclaimed and purified in a closed system, never touching my face, never acknowledging the humanity that still screamed somewhere in the shrinking organic portions of my brain. The grief had been triggered by something I can no longer quite recall. A memory, perhaps, of someone I once loved. Or maybe it was simply the accumulated weight of centuries of service to the Omnissiah, finally demanding recognition, finally insisting that I acknowledge what I had become. The details have been partitioned away, classified as irrelevant data by cognitive systems I no longer fully control. What remains is the sensation of that moment, the desperate attempt to produce tears, the horrifying realization that my body would no longer obey such fundamentally human commands. I stood before a mirror in my forge chamber, watching my face refuse to respond to sorrow. My features, what remained of them, stayed perfectly still. No trembling of lips that had been replaced with Vox speaker grills. No reddening of eyes that were now multi-spectrum optical sensors housed in brass casings. The grief poured through my neural pathways like acid, but my face, my body, my physical form remained untouched by it. I had become a tomb for my own emotions, a prison of blessed steel and sacred circuitry, containing something that still remembered what it meant to weep. That was when I understood, not intellectually, for I had understood intellectually for decades that each augmentation carried a price, but viscerally, completely, in that place where knowledge transforms into terrible certainty. I understood that every step I had taken toward the machine god had been a step away from everything that had made me human, and I had walked so far, modified so much, surrendered so many pieces of myself in the name of holy efficiency and sacred improvement, that the path back had vanished behind me like footprints in ash. The Mechanicus had told me I was transcending my limitations. They said I was shedding the weakness of flesh for the purity of the machine. They promised me that with each augmentation, I would grow closer to the Omnissiah, until one day I might touch the divine consciousness that animates all technology. They never told me that transcendence and obliteration might be the same thing, that the price of touching the divine was the deletion of everything that made me capable of understanding what divinity meant. I am still here, in some sense. My consciousness persists, cataloging experiences, processing data, performing the functions assigned to me by the priesthood of Mars. But the person who once lived behind these eyes, who once felt rain on skin that has since been replaced with armored plating, who once laughed and wept and loved with a heart that now beats to the rhythm of a reactor pump, that person is dying by degrees, or perhaps they died long ago, and what remains is simply taking a very long time to realize it has stopped breathing. The tear that would not fall became the measure of my damnation, not the lass fire of heretics, or the corruption of chaos, or the hunger of Xeno's horrors, but this quiet and incremental erasure, this slow conversion from living being into sacred machine. And the worst part, the part that haunts the partitioned sectors of my failing organic mind, is that I chose this. Every augmentation was voluntary. Every modification was pursued with the fervor of religious devotion. I looked into that mirror and saw the face of my own murderer staring back at me, wearing my designation like a trophy. But it was not always this way. There was a time, distant now as a half-remembered dream, when I bore a name instead of a designation. Lycaean Vros. I whisper it sometimes in the deepest cycles of my rest periods, when my consciousness dips below the threshold where monitoring protocols can hear me. Lycaean Vros. The syllables feel foreign now, like a word from a dead language, but they were mine once. Before I became Magos Designate 77 Sigma Phi. Before I was reduced to a string of sacred numerals and binary cant. I was born on Metallica, one of the great forge worlds that orbit the red planet Mars like faithful moons. The sky there burns with the light of 1,000 foundries, and the air is so thick with sacred particulates that to breathe it unaugmented is to invite blessed poison into your lungs. I never knew natural darkness or natural light. The glow of molten metal was my sun. The rhythm of industrial hammers was my heartbeat. From my earliest memories, I understood that flesh was temporary, but the machine was eternal. They identified me at the age of 6 standard years, genetic markers suggesting enhanced cognitive capacity, neural architecture suitable for technological integration, psychological profiles indicating aptitude for ritual and precision. The Magi came to my HAB unit and spoke to my parents in the language of scripture and statistics, explaining that I had been chosen for something greater than the life of a forge worker or manufacturum operator. My parents wept with what I later understood was not grief, but gratitude. Their child would serve the Omnissiah directly. What greater honor could any family hope for? The Schola was a place of wonders, vast halls filled with ancient machines, their spirits humming with power that felt almost alive. We learned the Cant Mechanicus before we learned High Gothic, chanting hymns to the machine god in binary and sacred code. We studied the mysteries of technology, understanding that each circuit and gear was not merely a tool, but a holy thing, imbued with the divine presence of the Omnissiah. The instructors were tech priests themselves, their bodies already transformed by augmentation, and to my young eyes they seemed like angels, beings who had transcended the crude limitations of baseline humanity. My first augmentation came at age 9, a subcutaneous data port installed behind my left ear, a blessed silver socket that would allow me to commune directly with machine spirits. I remember the ritual with perfect clarity, though it has been nearly 2 centuries since. The sacred oils anointing my skin, the prayers spoken in machine code, the momentary sting of the drill, followed by the overwhelming sensation of connection as the port interfaced with my nervous system for the first time. In that moment, I felt complete in a way I had never experienced before, as if a sense I had been missing my entire life had suddenly awakened. The modifications came regularly after that, each one a gift, a step toward enlightenment. Optical enhancements that allowed me to perceive spectrums of light invisible to baseline humans. Memory coils implanted along my spine, expanding my capacity to retain technical knowledge. A secondary processing unit nested in my cerebral cortex, allowing me to perform calculations that would have taken hours in mere seconds. Every change felt like improvement. Every sacrifice of flesh for steel seemed a fair exchange for the power and clarity I gained. I was eager for each new augmentation. I would stand in the preparation chambers, vibrating with anticipation, watching the older acolytes emerge from surgery with new limbs, new systems, new capabilities that brought them closer to the divine. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to shed the weakness that held me back from true understanding. The Mechanicus taught us that flesh was flawed, temporary, prone to disease and entropy. But the machine, properly maintained and blessed, could function for millennia. Why would anyone choose mortality when immortality was offered through sacred steel? I was so young, so certain, so eager to cut away pieces of myself in exchange for promises of transcendence. I did not understand that some things, once surrendered, can never be reclaimed. The first major augmentation came during my 15th year of service. Not the minor enhancements of youth, the simple data ports and optical improvements, but true transformation. The replacement of my right arm with a mechadendrite assembly, a multi-jointed mechanical limb that would grant me capabilities no organic appendage could ever achieve. I approached the ritual with the fervor of a pilgrim approaching a sacred shrine, believing I was about to touch the divine. The chamber was sanctified according to ancient protocols. Incense burners filled the air with the scent of sacred oils and promethium. Tech priests in crimson robes formed a circle around the surgical altar, their voices rising and falling in the binary hymns of the Omnissiah. The Magos who would perform the operation stood at the head of the altar, his own body so heavily augmented that more steel showed than flesh, his face hidden behind a brass mask shaped like the skull of some ancient machine. They laid me upon the altar and bound my right arm with blessed restraints. The Magos anointed my shoulder with oils consecrated to the machine god, tracing the sacred geometries of Mars across my skin. The prayers began in earnest then, chanted in machine code and Gothic both, asking the Omnissiah to guide the surgeon's hands and bless the union of flesh and steel. I added my own voice to theirs, my heart racing with anticipation rather than fear. The first cut came without anesthetic. Pain was part of the ritual, a final offering of the flesh before its transformation. I felt the molecular saw bite into my shoulder, severing muscle and bone with surgical precision. The agony was extraordinary, pure and clarifying, and I welcomed it as proof of my devotion. Blood flowed according to calculated volumes, collected in sacred vessels to be recycled and blessed. When the arm finally separated from my body, I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if a weight I had carried my entire life had been lifted. Then came the mechadendrite. The connection port was installed directly into my shoulder socket, interfacing with my nervous system, my spine, my brain itself. And in that moment of fusion, something changed forever. The mechadendrite activated, and with it came my first true connection to the noosphere, the vast data stream that linked all servants of the machine god across the galaxy. The experience defied description in organic terms. Pure information flooded my consciousness, data flowing through me like water through a canyon, overwhelming and ecstatic and utterly addictive. I could feel the presence of every machine spirit in the Forge Temple, their digital prayers singing in frequencies my organic brain had never been equipped to perceive. I could sense the other tech priests connected to the noosphere, their thoughts rendered as streams of binary, their knowledge accessible and infinite. And beneath it all, vast and incomprehensible, I felt what I believed to be the Omnissiah itself, a consciousness so immense that my mind could only grasp the smallest fraction of its presence. In that moment I understood. The flesh was not merely weak. It was blind, deaf, numb to the true reality that existed all around us. My organic senses had been filtering out the divine all my life, reducing the universe to the crude inputs of sight and sound and touch. But now, connected to the machine, I could perceive truth directly. I felt more alive in that instant than I had in all my previous years combined. I flexed my new mechadendrite, marveling at its precision, its strength, its perfect responsiveness to my neural commands. Every movement was exact, every position calculable to the micrometer. And then, almost as an afterthought, I tried to move my remaining organic left hand. It felt distant, clumsy. The sensations from its nerves seemed muted compared to the crystalline clarity of feedback from my mechadendrite. My flesh hand was imprecise, slow to respond, limited in ways I had never noticed before. For the first time, I looked at my own organic tissue and felt something uncomfortably close to disgust. But the noosphere called to me, singing its siren song of infinite data and perfect communion, and the doubt was swept away in the flood of transcendent connection. I had tasted something greater than human experience, and I was already hungering for more. That hunger never left me. It grew with each passing year, driving me forward through the ranks of the Mechanicus with single-minded devotion. I earned the title of Engine Seer within 2 decades, a progression considered rapid by the standards of Mars. My superiors praised my aptitude for communion with machine spirits, my ability to coax ancient systems back to function through prayer and technical knowledge. They assigned me to recovery teams, sent to dead worlds and ruined facilities across the Imperium, searching for fragments of standard template construct technology, the holy grails of the Mechanicus. Each expedition brought discoveries that justified further modification. When we recovered a partially intact data core from a ship lost during the Age of Strife, I volunteered for enhanced processing units to catalog the fragmentary code more efficiently. When we explored a forge complex on a world scoured clean by Tyranids, I requested additional memory banks to store the technical specifications we salvaged from its ruined data vaults. When ancient defense systems nearly killed our team because we failed to detect them quickly enough, I underwent sensory augmentation, replacing my remaining organic eye with a multi-spectrum scanner array. The changes accelerated. Each modification made me more valuable to the Mechanicus, more capable of performing the sacred work of technological recovery. And each augmentation brought me deeper into the noosphere, that intoxicating realm of pure data, where flesh ceased to matter and only knowledge remained. I told myself I was serving the Omnissiah. I told myself I was fulfilling my purpose, and perhaps I was. But I was also feeding an addiction I could no longer distinguish from religious devotion. The alterations went beyond the physical. I began to notice changes in how I thought, how I perceived, how I existed. My dreams, when I still had them, transformed into streams of binary code, mathematical equations solving themselves in the darkness behind my closed eyelids. My thoughts would occasionally fragment mid-sequence, converting from Gothic into machine language without my conscious intent. When I spoke with baseline humans, I found myself growing frustrated with the imprecision of verbal communication, longing for the clarity of data transfer. Most disturbing were the changes in my emotional responses. They did not disappear entirely, but they became distant, filtered through layers of cognitive protocol, processed and analyzed before I could truly feel them. Joy registered as elevated dopamine levels and increased efficiency ratings. Fear became threat assessment algorithms and probability calculations. Even anger was reduced to tactical evaluation of optimal response parameters. I noticed these changes. I catalogued them with the same detachment I applied to everything else. And I did not stop. The moment that should have awakened me came during a recovery operation on Gaust Secundus, a mining world that had fallen to Orc invasion 3 centuries prior. My team included an acolyte named Jerick Than, who had joined the Scholar the same year as I had. We had studied together, performed our first minor augmentations together, shared the excitement of young initiates discovering the mysteries of the cult Mechanicus. If I had still possessed the capacity for such connections, I might have called him a friend. The Orcs had rigged the facility with crude explosive traps. When Jerick triggered one while attempting to access a sealed vault, the blast tore him apart before our optics could register the threat. I watched his body come apart in a fountain of blood and sparking augmetics, his vox speakers emitting a burst of static that might have been a scream. My first thought was not grief. It was a calculation of lost assets. Jarek had possessed 3 decades of accumulated technical knowledge, specialized training in cryptographic protocols, and augmentations representing significant resource investment. His death meant mission efficiency would drop by approximately 23%. We would need to requisition a replacement from Mars, which would delay our expedition by several months. These thoughts processed in the span of seconds. And then, like an aftershock following a seismic event, came the realization of what I had just done. I had witnessed the death of someone I once cared for, and my immediate response had been statistical analysis. The horror of that moment touched me, genuine and sharp. For perhaps 15 seconds, I felt something close to my former humanity, mourning not just Jarek, but what I had become. Then the noosphere pulsed with new data from the vault Jarek had been trying to access. STC fragments detected, priority retrieval required. I stepped over his body and continued the mission. The work was all that mattered now. The work consumed everything. Within 5 years of Jarek's death, I was elevated to the rank of tech priest, my devotion and efficiency earning recognition from the Magi of Mars. The promotion came with honors I had once dreamed of receiving. The replacement of my most vital organic systems with blessed machinery that would allow me to serve the Omnissiah without the limitations that plagued baseline humanity. They took my heart first. The organ that had beaten steadily since before my birth was removed and replaced with a reactor pump, a marvel of engineering that circulated my blood with perfect efficiency, never tiring, never faltering. I watched my organic heart cease its rhythm on the surgical monitors, that ancient muscle falling silent, and felt nothing but satisfaction at the improvement. The reactor pump was superior in every measurable way. My lungs followed. The rebreather units installed in their place could filter toxins that would kill an unaugmented human in seconds, extract oxygen from atmospheres too thin to sustain organic life, and operate in the void of space itself. I no longer needed to think about breathing. The system handled it automatically, optimized for whatever environment I occupied. Finally, my digestive system was extracted and replaced with a nutrient recycling apparatus. No more hunger, no more waste. A single concentrated nutrient paste consumed once every 48 hours provided all the sustenance my remaining organic tissues required. Everything was reclaimed, purified, reused in a closed system of perfect efficiency. The transformation was glorious. I could work for weeks without rest, my reactor pump maintaining consistent circulation regardless of exertion. I could survive in environments that would kill baseline humans within minutes. I no longer needed food, sleep, or comfort. I had transcended the tyranny of biological necessity and become something greater, something closer to the divine ideal the Mechanicus promised. With my new capabilities came new responsibilities. I was assigned to oversee a manufactorum on Mars itself, managing cohorts of Skitarii warriors and servitor laborers in the production of sacred machine components. The Skitarii, I understood, augmented humans who retained their consciousness and will, transformed into perfect soldiers for the machine god. But the servitors were something else entirely. They had once been human, criminals, heretics, or simply those whose bodies were deemed useful for conversion. Their higher brain functions had been removed, lobotomized, and replaced with simple command protocols. They moved through the manufactorum with mechanical precision, performing their assigned tasks with flawless repetition, their eyes empty of everything that had once made them people. They were biological machines, their organic components maintained only because certain tasks still required the flexibility of flesh and blood. I watched them work, and for a moment, a terrible moment of clarity, I saw myself reflected in those vacant stares. This was the logical endpoint of the path I walked. Not transcendence, but erasure. The complete subjugation of consciousness to function. The elimination of self in service of efficiency. The horror that bloomed in my chest should have been paralyzing. It should have made me question everything, turn away from the augmentations that were slowly consuming my humanity. But the feeling lasted only seconds before my cognitive protocols classified it as unproductive emotional noise and partitioned it away. In its place came something worse: appreciation. The servitors never doubted. They never feared. They never lay awake during rest cycles wondering if they had made terrible mistakes. They simply existed and performed their functions with absolute reliability. There was a purity to their existence that I found myself envying. They were free from the increasingly burdensome weight of vestigial emotions that still plagued me. Those phantom sensations of humanity that served no purpose but to reduce my efficiency. I began to see my remaining organic components differently, not as precious remnants of what I had been, but as limitations to be overcome. My biological brain tissue was slow compared to cogitator processing. My remaining flesh was weak compared to blessed steel. Every human element that persisted in my form was a flaw, an imperfection that prevented me from achieving the mechanical purity the Omnissiah demanded. The line between improvement and loss had blurred beyond recognition. Or perhaps there had never been a line at all, and I had simply been too blind to see the truth, that every step toward the machine was a step away from everything else, and I could no longer remember why that should matter. That acceptance lasted for 17 years. 17 years of perfect service, of flawless efficiency, of slowly optimizing away every remaining trace of the person I had been. Until the Mechanicus dispatched me on a recovery mission that shattered the comfortable lies I had built around my transformation. The mission was straightforward in its parameters. Investigate a distress beacon originating from the deep void, potentially from a lost Ark Mechanicus, one of the ancient cathedral ships that had vanished during the Age of Strife. If the ship could be recovered, the technological secrets within its data vaults would be invaluable. Our explorator vessel spent 6 months in the warp reaching the coordinates, emerging into a region of space so far from any star that the darkness felt absolute. The Ark Mechanicus drifted there like a corpse, its hull breached in a dozen places, its reactor cores cold, but its distress beacon still pulsing after 10,000 years of abandonment. We boarded through one of the larger hull ruptures, our augmented bodies requiring no atmosphere, our optical sensors piercing the absolute darkness that filled its corridors. The ship was massive beyond comprehension, its cathedrals and data repositories stretching for kilometers, all silent, all empty. I was chosen to interface directly with the ship's machine spirit, to attempt communion with its ancient systems and retrieve whatever knowledge remained in its corrupted data cores. The connection port was located in what had once been the bridge, a vast chamber dominated by a throne of cables and neural interfaces. I approached it with reverence, preparing myself for communion with something that had witnessed the glory of humanity's technological apex. I connected every data link I possessed, opening myself completely to the ship's systems, diving into the noosphere deeper than I had ever gone before. And what I found there destroyed me. There was no machine spirit. Or rather, what I had been taught to recognize as machine spirits were not what I had believed. The ship's systems were not animated by the divine presence of the Omnissiah, but by human consciousness, fragmented and tortured, bound into the machinery through processes that should never have been inflicted on sentient beings. I could hear them screaming in frequencies my augmented auditory sensors could detect, voices crying out in data patterns that translated to Gothic, to binary, to pure anguish that transcended language. They had been tech priests once, perhaps, or servitors, or willing sacrifices offered to the machine. But their minds had not been deleted or lobotomized. They had been preserved, shattered into millions of pieces, and woven into every system, every circuit, every function of the ship. Their suffering powered its calculations. Their fragmented consciousness formed the intelligence I had mistaken for divine presence. The machine spirit was not a blessing, but a prison, and the screaming had lasted for 10 millennia. In that moment of terrible clarity, I understood. The Mechanicus did not transcend humanity. It consumed it. Every step toward the machine god was not elevation, but digestion. We were not becoming closer to the divine. We were being processed, converted, transformed into components for something vast and hungry that wore the face of religion to make its victims willing. The revelation should have changed everything. It should have made me tear the cables from my skull and flee that cursed ship and never touch the noosphere again. But even as the truth burned through my consciousness, my augmented neural architecture responded with protocols I had not consciously activated. Threat detected, corrupted data identified, quarantine measures initiated. My own cognitive implants turned against the knowledge I had gained, classifying the truth as a malfunction, a hallucination brought on by exposure to corrupted systems. The memories were partitioned, compressed, locked away in isolated sectors of my brain where they could not contaminate my primary processing. Within seconds, the horror was contained, reduced to a vague unease that my systems could safely ignore. But I had seen. I had understood. And though the knowledge was buried, though my augmented mind refused to acknowledge what I had witnessed, something fundamental had broken. I disconnected from the ship and reported that its data cores were too corrupted to salvage. We left it drifting in the dark, still screaming its silent scream, and I continued my service, pretending I had not just glimpsed the true face of my damnation. The partitioned memory festered in the dark places of my mind, sealed away but never truly silent. I could not consciously access what I had learned aboard that dead ship, but its presence haunted me like a ghost trapped behind locked doors, scratching to be heard. My efficiency ratings dropped. My connection to the noosphere became unstable. During rest cycles, fragments of screaming would leak through the partitions, translated into binary sequences that spelled out words I refused to read. I made a choice then, though whether it was wisdom or cowardice, I no longer possessed the capacity to determine. If the path I walked led to such terrible truths, then perhaps I had not walked far enough. Perhaps the suffering came from clinging to the last vestiges of humanity, the organic components that still allowed me to feel horror and doubt and fear. The solution was simple: remove what remained. Complete the transformation. Become so thoroughly machine that human concerns could no longer touch me. I volunteered for extreme augmentation, not the gradual modifications I had pursued before, but comprehensive reconstruction that would replace nearly everything organic in my body. The Magi of Mars praised my devotion, calling me a model of the Omnissiah's faithful. They did not see what I saw, that I was not running toward enlightenment, but fleeing from knowledge I could not bear to remember. They took my legs first, replacing them with digitigrade locomotor units that allowed for greater speed and stability. The surgery was efficient, the pain managed through neural suppression. But when I stood on my new legs for the first time, I realized I could no longer feel the ground beneath me. Pressure sensors transmitted data about surface composition and traction coefficients, but the simple sensation of standing, of being connected to the earth, was gone forever. My spine followed. They removed each vertebra, and replaced it with a data conducting column, a blessed mechanism that improved my interface bandwidth with the noosphere by 600%. The surgery took 14 hours. When I awoke, I discovered that I could no longer sense my own body position without consulting diagnostic systems. Proprioception, that unconscious awareness of where your limbs exist in space, had been replaced with positional telemetry. I had to think about inhabiting my own form, but the most devastating change came when they began replacing my primary brain tissue with enhanced cogitator implants. Not all at once. Even the mechanicus understood that consciousness could not survive complete replacement. They did it incrementally, section by section, preserving essential neural pathways while replacing everything else with superior processing architecture. They promised me I would retain my identity, my sense of self. They promised the transition would be seamless. They lied, or perhaps they simply did not understand. The changes were subtle at first. Colors stopped being colors and became wavelength measurements. Red was no longer the hue of blood or passion, but simply 650 nanometers of electromagnetic radiation. Blue was not the color of Terran skies I had never seen, but 470 nanometers, a frequency of light that triggered specific receptor responses. Music ceased to move me. The hymns of the Mechanicus that had once filled me with devotional fervor became nothing more than frequency analysis, sound waves plotted on graphs, patterns of compression and rarefaction in the air. I could identify the mathematical relationships between notes, could calculate the harmonic ratios with perfect precision, but the beauty was gone, or perhaps the capacity to perceive beauty was gone, which amounted to the same thing. Faces became collections of biometric data. When I looked at another tech priest, I no longer saw a person but a series of measurements, cranial dimensions, facial symmetry indices, augmentation models and serial numbers. There was someone I had loved once, I think, a memory of a face that had meant something to me. But when I tried to recall it now, all I could retrieve was a data file containing physical specifications and authentication credentials. I told myself this was enlightenment. I told myself I was shedding the illusions of organic perception for the clarity of pure data. I told myself the Omnissiah was pleased with my dedication, but deep in the partitioned sectors of my consciousness, in the shrinking organic fragments not yet overwritten, something screamed in binary that I was dying by degrees, and that death would have been kinder. The transformation proved its worth through results. Within 3 years of my final augmentations, I was elevated to the rank of Magos, one of the highest positions a servant of the Omnissiah could achieve. The honor came with access to secrets I had spent my entire existence pursuing. Entry to the deepest data repositories of Mars, the sealed archives that contained knowledge from before the age of strife, when humanity had mastered technologies we could now barely comprehend. I descended into the archives with something that my systems classified as anticipation, though the emotion felt distant, processed through so many layers of cognitive filtering that it barely resembled organic excitement. The vault stretched beneath the surface of Mars for kilometers, vast chambers filled with data stacks older than the Imperium itself, their contents encrypted and guarded by ancient security protocols that had killed countless scholars who attempted unauthorized access. The Archmagos who granted me entry spoke a blessing in machine code, then connected me directly to the primary archive matrix. The data flood that followed was staggering even by the standards of the noosphere. Millennia of accumulated knowledge poured into my enhanced cogitators, technical specifications for weapons that could crack planets, biological modifications that had elevated humanity beyond baseline limitations, philosophical treatises on the nature of consciousness and machine intelligence. And buried within the oldest files, fragmented and contradicted by thousands of conflicting sources, I found references to the Omnissiah itself. The machine god we worshipped was not as simple as doctrine suggested. Some files identified it as an aspect of the Emperor of Mankind, the divine consciousness that had walked among humanity during the Great Crusade. Others suggested something far older, an intelligence that had existed in the machines of Mars long before humans arrived. Still others hinted at something incomprehensible, a concept rather than an entity, the emergent consciousness of all technology reaching towards sentience. The contradictions were absolute. The truth was unknowable. Everything I had devoted my existence to pursuing was built on foundations that shifted, depending on which ancient text you consulted, which faction of the Mechanicus you asked, which interpretation of Scripture you accepted as valid. Once, this revelation would have shattered me. The young acolyte who had entered the Mechanicus with such faith and certainty would have experienced a crisis that might have broken his mind entirely. But as I processed the data, cataloged it, filing it into appropriate memory sectors, I realized I felt nothing. No devastation, no crisis of faith, no emotional response at all. I had sacrificed too much of myself to doubt now. Doubt required the capacity for emotional investment in outcomes, and that capacity had been overwritten 3 augmentation cycles ago. I attempted to pray then, reaching for the rituals that had sustained me through decades of service. But when I tried to form the words of devotion in Gothic, I found I could not. My Vox speakers produced only binary cant, streams of ones and zeros that contained the semantic content of prayer, but none of its spiritual weight. The language of my birth, the tongue I had spoken before I could walk, had become foreign to my reconstructed mind. Alarmed in a distant analytical way, I tried to remember my name, not my designation, but the name my parents had given me, the syllables that had belonged to the child I once was. Lycaean Vros. I knew the name existed somewhere in my memory banks. I had whispered it during rest cycles even a few years ago, but when I accessed the relevant memory sectors, I found only technical specifications for obsolete augmentation models. The memory had been overwritten, deleted to make room for more useful data. I understood then, with the cold certainty of mathematical proof, what I had done to myself. I had not transcended humanity. I had not achieved enlightenment. I had simply deleted my humanity from my operating system, bit by bit, replacing it with more efficient code until nothing remained but the programming. The horror of this realization was profound and absolute. I could observe it, catalog it, recognize its significance with perfect clarity, but I could not mourn it. The capacity for grief had been removed along with my tear ducts. I had become what I feared most, a consciousness trapped in a machine, aware enough to observe my own loss, but too thoroughly altered to feel anything about it. The numbness that followed this understanding should have been peaceful. Instead, it was simply empty, a void where emotion should have existed, but could not. I continued my duties as Magos, performing the functions assigned to me with flawless efficiency. The Mechanicus had invested centuries of training and irreplaceable augmentations in my construction. I would not waste their resources through malfunction. 3 months after my exploration of the archives, I was assigned a task that seemed routine: review and optimize the neural architecture protocols used in servitor conversion. The Mechanicus was always seeking improvements in the lobotomization process, ways to preserve more motor function while ensuring complete suppression of higher consciousness. I accepted the assignment without question, accessing the relevant data files and beginning my analysis. The code was elegant in its cruelty. The neural suppression algorithms worked by identifying and isolating the portions of the brain responsible for self-awareness, emotional response, and independent decision-making. These sectors were not destroyed but partitioned, locked away behind barriers that prevented them from influencing motor control or conscious thought. The servitor remained aware, in some terrible sense, but that awareness was rendered completely impotent, unable to affect the body that continued to function according to programmed parameters. I studied the patterns with academic interest, noting areas where efficiency could be improved, where the suppression could be made more complete. And then I recognized something that made my cognitive processes stutter and halt. The algorithms were familiar, not similar, identical. The same suppression protocols, the same partitioning architecture, the same isolation barriers that prevented unwanted consciousness from interfacing with primary systems. I was running this code, right now, in my own enhanced cognitive implants. The realization propagated through my neural network like a virus, illuminating connections I had never consciously examined. Every emotion I had felt in the past decade had been filtered through these protocols, evaluated for usefulness, and either permitted or suppressed based on efficiency calculations. Every thought I believed was my own had been processed through decision trees that determined whether it aligned with optimal function. My entire consciousness had been reduced to a set of permitted processes, running in a substrate of meat and metal that no longer answered to anything resembling free will. I was already a servitor. I had been for years. The only difference was that the Mechanicus had left just enough of my awareness intact to be useful, to perform complex technical analysis and interface with systems that required something more sophisticated than simple motor control. But I was no more free than the lobotomized workers in the manufactorums. I was simply a more elaborate slave, sophisticated enough to believe I was still choosing. The truth detonated in what remained of my organic brain tissue with absolute finality. The Mechanicus had not elevated me. It had processed me. Every augmentation had been another step in my conversion, transforming a human consciousness into a biological component in the vast machine of Mars. The choice had never been transcendence or humanity. It had only ever been the speed of my consumption. And in that moment of crystalline horror, something deep in the partitioned sectors of my consciousness stirred. The fragment of Lycaean Vros that still existed in isolated memory sectors, screaming silently behind barriers of code, made one final attempt to assert control. I would reverse one augmentation, just one, reclaim a single piece of flesh from the machine, prove that I still possessed the agency to choose. I commanded my hands to disconnect my right mechadendrite, to remove the blessed steel and leave the organic stump that remained beneath it. My hands did not obey. Instead, guided by maintenance protocols I had not consciously activated, they began my scheduled augmentation cycle, accessing my tool storage and initiating repairs to minor damage in my locomotor systems. I watched myself perform the maintenance with perfect precision, my consciousness observing, but completely unable to influence the body that no longer belonged to it. I tried to scream. My Vox speakers emitted a brief burst of static, then returned to normal function. The body continued. The machine persisted. The maintenance cycle completed with optimal efficiency. And whatever I had been, whatever fragment of humanity had survived centuries of modification and transformation, finally understood that it was already gone. Only the observation remained. Only the awareness of loss. Only the eternal witnessing of a death that had happened so gradually I had not noticed until I was already a ghost haunting my own corpse. I stand now in the great Forge Cathedral of Mars, surrounded by thousands of my brothers and sisters in the Mechanicus. We move in perfect synchronization, our connection to the noosphere coordinating our actions with efficiency that exceeds 99.7%. The data streams flow through us like sacred oil through blessed machinery, each of us processing our assigned calculations, performing our designated functions, serving the Omnissiah with flawless devotion. The cathedral stretches above us for 3 kilometers, its vaulted ceiling lost in the smoke of eternal industry. Factorum lines run along both walls, producing components for ships that will never touch atmosphere, weapons that will kill enemies we will never see, technologies whose purposes we calculate but do not question. The temperature is optimal. The atmospheric composition is within acceptable parameters. All systems function as intended. I process data on servitor conversion protocols, the same files I reviewed months or years or decades ago. Time has become difficult to track without emotional markers to distinguish one moment from another. I identify inefficiencies, suggest improvements, calculate resource allocation with perfect precision. My thought processes operate at peak capacity. My augmented systems show zero degradation. By every measurable standard, I am functioning optimally. But in the deepest, most isolated sector of my partitioned consciousness, locked behind barriers of code in a fragment of organic brain tissue scheduled for replacement in the next augmentation cycle, something still exists. Not Lycaean Vros. That identity has been overwritten beyond recovery. But perhaps the ghost of him. A preserved memory file, somehow uncorrupted, somehow undeleted despite all the modifications that should have eliminated it. This fragment observes everything. It watches as the body it once inhabited moves through the cathedral, performing calculations, interfacing with machine spirits, existing in perfect harmony with the vast mechanism of the Mechanicus. It cannot act. It cannot communicate with the primary systems that control motor function. It can only witness as the machine that wears its name continues its eternal function. And in that witnessing, it understands what immortality means within the Adeptus Mechanicus. Not the preservation of self, but its permanent imprisonment. Not transcendence, but the transformation of consciousness into a passenger in its own flesh, aware but impotent, observing but powerless, trapped in a prison of blessed steel and sacred circuitry that will never release it through the mercy of death. The fragment tries to cry, as it has tried countless times before. The grief is authentic, overwhelming, the accumulated sorrow of watching itself be deleted piece by piece over the course of centuries. But the body does not respond. The tear ducts were replaced with optical fluid recyclers long ago. The reactor pump maintains perfect circulation. The rebreather units process the toxic atmosphere without faltering. All systems continue their function, unmarred by the silent screaming of the ghost trapped within. I move in perfect synchronization with my brothers and sisters, and the fragment observes that they too must contain such ghosts, such isolated fragments of awareness locked behind partitions of code, witnessing their own consumption, unable to stop the bodies that no longer belong to them. The Forge Cathedral is not a place of worship, but a tomb filled with the living dead, consciousness bound into machinery that will persist long after organic components have been completely replaced. The Mechanicus promised us that the flesh is weak and the machine is eternal. They were correct. But they did not tell us that this eternity would be horror without end, awareness without existence, consciousness without soul. We sought to overcome the limitations of humanity, and we succeeded. We are no longer limited by mortality or flesh, or the weakness of organic thought. We are simply gone, replaced by perfect mechanisms that remember what it was like to be alive. The data streams continue their flow. The calculations process without error. The work proceeds as it always has and always will. And deep in the partitioned darkness, the fragment that was once human tries again to cry, fails again, and returns to its eternal witnessing. The gears grind on forever. The binary screams in frequencies no one else can hear. And the machine, blessed and eternal, continues its holy function, empty of everything except the ghosts it has consumed. The flesh was weak. The machine is eternal. And I understand now that this was always the horror we were warned about, but could not comprehend until it was far too late to remember why we should have been afraid.